and welcome to the 3-2-1 notes. We are going to go ahead and learn how to solve equations by taking square roots. So if I look at example 1, it says solve 2x squared minus 5 equals 195. So the first thing we're always going to do is what we've done in every other equation. We're going to isolate the x. So I'm going to first say, okay, to get x alone, I have this minus 5. So I'm going to add 5 to both sides. So those 5's will cancel. On the left-hand side, I'd be left with 2x squared equals 195 plus 5 is 200. Like any other equation, we're going to now get the x squared term by itself. So if you notice, in front of the x squared is a 2. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. So I would be left with x squared equals 200 divided by 2 is 100. So I need to solve for x. It said it here right in the directions. So if you think back to last year, we talked about how to undo an x squared. Well, to get rid of that exponent of 2, I'm going to have to take the square root. We do the opposite. So to do the opposite of x squared, that's going to be the square root. So now I'll be left with x by itself. And remember, the square root of 100 is a positive 10 or a negative 10. So we can write that as plus or minus 10. So that's my final answer. All right, looking at number 2. This says solve 4 times x plus 3 squared minus 10 equals negative 6. So this one looks a little bit different. We're going to follow the same procedure to get x alone. I'm going to first get rid of that minus 10 by adding 10 to both sides. So then on the left-hand side, I'm left with 4 times x plus 3 squared equals, and then negative 6 plus 10 is going to give me a positive 4. So now I'm going to get rid of that 4 that's being multiplied by our x plus 3 squared. The way we're going to get rid of it, if it's being multiplied, the opposite of multiplication is division. So we're going to divide 4 by both sides. So I'm left with, on the left-hand side, x plus 3 squared equals 4 divided by 4 is 1. Okay. So do you notice how the parentheses is around that x plus 3? And that entire quantity is being squared. So even to get to the x term, I'm going to have to get rid of that exponent. So we're going to do the opposite of squaring, and at this point we're going to have to take the square root. So on the left-hand side, I would be left with x plus 3. On the right-hand side, we know the square root of 1 is plus or minus 1. So now we're almost there to get x alone. So I can go ahead and subtract 3 to get x by itself. The opposite of x plus 3, to get rid of that 3, we would have to go ahead and subtract it. So typically, we're going to put this number in front of the plus or minus sign. So this is x equals negative 3 plus or minus 1. I can actually simplify that into 2 answers. This can be broken down into x equals negative 3 plus 1 Or we could write it as x equals -3 minus 1. Notice how all I did was take this plus or minus and separate it. Here I put the plus, here I put the minus. The reason why I did that is I can actually simplify to get two different answers here. -3 plus 1 is -2. -3 minus 1 is -4. So in the end, once I separate those expressions, I'm left with x equals -2 and x equals -4. All right, if you look at example 3, it says solve x minus 1 squared plus 15 equals -1. Well, again, we're going to deal with that square term last. So let's go ahead and take this plus 15 and move it to the opposite side of the equation by subtracting 15. So at this point, I have no terms in front of the parentheses or behind the parentheses. So I need to get rid of that exponent. So I can go ahead and I can take the square root of both sides. Well, do you notice how on the left-hand side I'd be left with x minus 1? But on the right-hand side, wait a second. We can't take a square root of a negative number. That's impossible. That is an imaginary answer. So if we're solving for x here, there's no real solution for x. So we could say that here there's just no real solution. And the reason why is because you cannot take the square root of a negative. So you cannot square root a negative number. All right, so looking at example 4, notice I have 4 being multiplied by x minus 10 squared equals 25. So we want to isolate that squared term. So I'm going to have to get rid of that 4 that's in the front there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to divide, because right now it's being multiplied by that term. So I'm going to divide both sides by 4. So I'm going to have on the left-hand side x minus 10 squared equals, and then I can just leave this as 25 divided by 4 as 25/4. So at this point, the squared term is by itself, so I can go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So on the left-hand side, I'd be left with x minus 10. On the right-hand side, the square root of 25 over 4, well, those are both perfect squares. The square root of 25 is 5. The square root of 4 is 2. So this would be plus or minus 5/2. And we can just make that a decimal. So I can just say this is plus or minus 2.5. Remember, I could put this in the calculator and say the square root of 25 divided by 4, and it tells me 2.5. All right, so now to solve for x, all I have to do is add 10. And remember, when we add that number to both sides, it's going to go in front of the plus or minus sign. So 10 plus or minus 2.5. So remember, we have to keep going to find the two numbers that are represented in these expressions. So I need to figure out what's 10 plus 2.5 and what's 10 minus 2.5. Well, 10 plus 2.5 is 12.5. And my other answer, 10 minus 2.5, so that would be 7.5. All right, so that's how you would solve equations by taking square roots. You are going to try numbers 1 through 5 on your own on the bottom. Make sure you show your work. All right, you have a great day.